Hello and welcome to our first episode, I think. Yeah, this is going to be our first episode of Lessons from the Dragon's Library. Um, that title may change. That's sort of a working title for something I planned to do. I've been talking about doing for a little while is doing writing lesson podcasts. Why is the YouTube video not refreshing? There we are. Sorry about that. Still getting used to the new Creator Studio on YouTube, the screen, the delay, and all that. But anyway, so I've been talking about doing this for a while. I've been a writer for a long time. I recently, when I say recently, now it's been almost 2 years. I published my first novel, officially, what I would consider officially becoming an author. You can find my books now on my website, trevorbiersbach.com, and on amazon.com. And if you look on Twitter and the links below in the YouTube video, you can find all the information about my writing and stuff. But that's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to push my books. If you like what I have to say about writing and you want more information about that, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Facebook. We can chat more about that stuff. But what I'm here to talk about today is a suggestion from one of my mutual Twitter followers, friends on social media, Gwen Lily Knight, and I think I'm saying that right. I hope I'm saying that right again. I always mess that up. But anyway, she was the first one to make a suggestion as far as a topic to talk about on the first inaugural show. And she wanted to know, how would you write, or how should you write, or how best could somebody write in second person without sounding weird or without it coming off as unusual. Now, second person, for those who don't know, so there are three main perspectives to write a book from. You can get into more granular categories, more fine. The word I'm looking for. You can funnel those categories down into even more specifics. But there are three main perspectives to use. First person, where first person is like you're reading a book where somebody's telling you a story. You're reading a story that somebody's telling you. So first person is going to have a lot of I did this and I did that and I saw this. That's first person. Detective novels, Harry Dresden books, the old pulp detective novels were really commonly written in first person. It's a very easy perspective to write those books in. It gives you a very limited perspective when you write first person, in that the writer can only use the knowledge that the protagonist has in a first person narrative. So the writer doesn't have the luxury of telling you what happened at things that happened when the protagonist wasn't there. So it limits the perspective a little bit. It's not the most difficult perspective, but it is more difficult than the most common one, which is third person. Third person perspective is when somebody is telling you the story of things that happen to other people, not to themselves. So most books and stories are written third person perspective. It gives you a wide range of area to tell your story in. You can tell the reader about things that happen that your protagonist doesn't witness. You can split viewpoints between characters. It's one of the things I do in Embers of Liberty. Almost chapter for chapter, I bounce back and forth between the viewpoint of two different characters in that book to tell the story. So you might have one chapter that follows John Everman, which is the main character, and then you're going to have the next chapter follows Lieutenant Casey, who is sort of his adversary, not necessarily the villain of the story, but more of the adversary that pushes the protagonist on. That's third person. Third person is telling the story, sort of stepping back, telling the story almost as if you're talking about the events that happened to somebody else. And then second person, which to me would be the hardest way to write a narrative story, is telling the story from the perspective of the reader being the protagonist. Now we're going to get into some examples, because that's a very confusing way to describe story. So to take a little bit of a step, toward where second person works really well at. Second person works really well in technical writing. Giving instruction to people. A lot of times when you read instruction manuals, it says things like you do this or you need to do that. That is probably the most literal and basic form of second person writing. It's technical writing, instructional writing. It also works really well in games, which I'm very familiar with. I've been a gamer all my life. I've been a tabletop and video gamer since I can remember. So second person is very much taking the reader and putting them in the role of the protagonist and saying, here is what happens to you. You do these things. The biggest pitfall of second person writing is it's very limited in how long you can keep that up. It works okay with short stories. It works exceptionally well in gaming, and it works okay in stories that model gaming. We're going to talk about that example here in a little bit too. So second person writing, it works. You can use it for short stories, especially really unusual, imaginative, fantastical or science fiction type short stories where you're really trying to put the viewer, put the reader behind the eyes of your protagonist, and you're describing a world to them as if they're seeing it themselves for the first time. It works good for that kind of short fiction. It also works really good for erotica. There's a whole category of erotica that is basically the reader, describing the things that happen to the reader as if they're the person witnessing the events. But I think the most, and it has been used in novels before. There are a couple examples out there. You can find them. I've not read them. I have no idea how that would work in long form. The biggest hurdle you run into is that you're taking away all of the agency of your reader, and you're basically entrapping them in the story and making things happen to them. And that's difficult, especially for certain things. Like when you're telling a first person story, the reader is very detached from the things that are happening to you. That's definitely not happening to me. That's happening to you. Sure, you're telling me that it happened to you, but that reader doesn't really have to experience those things unless they want to. In third person, those things are happening to somebody else. They're happening to somebody that's disconnected from us now by two steps. In first person, it's me telling you the story, so we're connected by one step. You can get a lot of empathy in your reader when you're using first person, because you're basically saying, here's what happened to me. And when somebody's telling you what happened to them, you can tend to get more empathy, especially with certain really sensitive topics, because people automatically, it's human nature to feel empathy in most cases for people and things that happen to them. But third person, you're disconnected by two steps. You are telling the story of things that happen to other people, so the person you're telling the story to is disconnected from those events by at least a factor of two, if not more. So empathy can become more difficult when you get into third person. Now with first person or with second person, there is no disconnect between the reader and the events that are happening. You're saying these things are happening to you, which can still generate a lot of empathy, but you can also run into issues where you may lose your reader immediately with the wrong sequence of events. Your reader may become completely detached from your story or not invested in your story immediately, depending on their life experiences and the things that you're writing. So that's sort of the struggle you'll run into writing second person, especially in long form, because when you're writing a novel, obviously you need a lot more conflict and a lot more trauma, I guess you would say, than you need for short fiction. So you're going to have to put your reader through things in order to move that plot along. And in a novel-sized long fiction, I'm not sure how that would work. That would be a struggle. But Where it does work really well is in gaming and in hybrid gaming fiction, which we'll talk about in a minute, because I think that may be, if you're wanting to write a story and you're not wanting to write a game, a tabletop or a video game, then you're going to want to look into hybrid fiction, and we'll get to that. So in gaming, I pulled up this example because I can still hear the guy's voice. I came up in the era of gaming I mean, I'm an old guy. Some of my first PC games, I mean, I started with, Atari was my first system. So, but storytelling became even more prominent when when they moved beyond Atari, beyond the 8-bit systems. You had some story, like the storytelling evolved through those eras and through those games, but really when you got into PC, when you got into the long form role-playing games, you started really getting into the big storytelling that came in gaming. And one of the very first ones I remember, and I still remember today because I can still hear the narrator's voice in my head, was Baldur's Gate. And Baldur's Gate had some very good examples of second-person writing. Now, automatically, if your game is designed right, and your story around the game is designed correctly, you are already in second person. You are taking the player and you're putting him in the role of the character you've created. Now, some games blur that line. Some games are literally, this is you, and you're doing these things. And then other games are, you are this character. This character's not you, you're playing the role of somebody else, but let's imagine that these events are happening to you. So an example of that would be like the dream sequences from Baldur's Gate. And if you guys played that game, you know this guy's voice immediately. Like, there were these scenes where you would rest your character so you could heal and save the game and all those things. And every so often you would get a dream that would help progress the story, and you would, the screen would change and the text would come up, and that voice, that very distinctive voice that we all remember from Baldur's Gate, would start. And here's just one excerpt from the first dream in chapter 2, if your reputation was high enough. So the narrator begins after the screen change. It says, "You do not dream often, but tonight the visions are vivid indeed. Long have you walked, but now you find yourself back amid the stones of Candlekeep. Your former home looms before you, but the gate is closed and barred. Over the walls there is a candle in your old room, but as the light goes out, the brick surrounding the window closes together. The very walls conspire to keep you at bay." So you could see here how this is designed. Now, while you're not literally you in the game, you are playing the protagonist, the son of, well, I'm not going to give away any spoilers just in case you haven't played it, but you're playing a character set in a fantasy world. You're not playing yourself, but the story is written as if it were you. You do not dream often, but tonight the visions are vivid. Long have you walked. So there's, you is the constant pronoun in second person writing, because it's supposed to be about you. Now that works really well in gaming, because as a gamer you are intentionally sitting down and in a way giving up part of your agency. Now, not completely, because in games are interactive. You still get to make choices on where to go and what to do and what to click on, and you can fight or not fight or get better at it or whatever you do. So different than a story, a short story, or a novel, a game gives you more agency. But you are still subject to the story in the game. You are still being pushed along a story that mostly you aren't creating. Now, some RPGs are better at that. Some RPGs have multi-pathing storylines and conversations and multiple endings and things like that. But some aren't. Some are very linear. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is a perfect example of that. A very linear storyline. Everything is happening to you. It's a very second-person story, but you're playing the role of Senua. So in a way, it's not happening to you. whereas Baldur's Gate and then later RPGs along that vein were very multi pathing. Granted, there was still usually only one ending or one outcome. There were a lot of different ways to get there, so you had a lot of agency in these games. Another place where this works, gaming related, is also in tabletop. So if you were to pick up, say you were to pick up a Dungeons and Dragons module, I don't know about recent ones because I haven't played that game specifically in a lot of years, but a Pathfinder module or an older D&D module, you're going to run into descriptions that the dungeon master, the person who is facilitating the game and making sure the players have all the information they need, and the guy who adjudicates, the guy or gal who adjudicates on dice rolls and skill checks and all that, the DM, the storyteller, the GM, whatever you want to call him, is going to have certain passages in those modules, those adventures, those stories, where he's going to stop and say, this is what you see. Now, some players are very second person. They are the character. They're so into it. They're, it's them seeing it. And then some players are a little more back from the character. I'm playing the role of this person, but that's not me. But still, your storyteller, your DM is still saying, you see these things, you do this, and this is what happens. So it's still a second person sort of play or storytelling style. It's just a little more interactive, and it's also a little more a little less restrictive than video games. Video games are pretty limited in scope, even though, so like Baldur's Gate, you could play Baldur's Gate for somewhere around 80 hours if you wanted to do everything. But you were still limited to the coding. You were still limited to the things that the developers put in the game. Whereas a tabletop game, you're really only limited by the imagination and the time that your group has to put into it. So that sort of second person storytelling can go on for a long time, and be very, very, give you a lot of agency, be very open world, be very explorative. But at the end of the day, it's still second person storytelling. And that's where, to me, those two medium is where that works best for narrative storytelling, is when you get into gaming. Now, there's another type of storytelling. Some of you who are as old as me may remember these. Some people who are into older vintage gaming stuff and books may remember these, or you may have seen these. If you haven't, I highly recommend them. But we used to have a lot of fun with books called Choose Your Own Adventure. Now, these came in all sorts of styles and genres, and you had everything from like detective stories to fantasy adventures to science fiction. You probably hear my dog click around on the hallways, driving me bonkers, his nails. But Choose Your Own Adventure books are what I would call hybrid gaming, sort of narrative storytelling. So if you look these things up, you can find them. They were usually very small. I wouldn't call them long form fiction, even though you had the book that was maybe 100 pages. Because of the design of the book and the design of the story structure, you didn't read all those pages. It wasn't like you were sitting down to read a 100-page book. So if you're not familiar with what a Choose Your Own Adventure book it is, basically it starts with a premise. It'll start on page 1 and describe the story to you, or the initial events, and then you're going to be given a choice. What basically it was, here's this information, what do you do? And that's because it was a second person style or perspective of story. I have one example up here, which is actually from the second page, and I don't issue number 24. No, that's not it. I want to credit the book that it's from, so I'm trying to find an example of one where it tells me what the book is. I have some, I just can't remember where they are. But I want to make sure I'm giving you the actual... Man, that's frustrating. The one I found online does not actually tell you which Choose Your Own Adventure book it's from. But it appears to be one of the more, like, they had a lot of young boy and young girl like adventure stories, almost like Hardy Boys books, and my wife's gonna kill me because I can't remember her name. The Hardy Boys companion detective story for girls. I can't remember her name. My wife's gonna kill me because she loved her. I'm just really horrible with recalling names and titles and things like that. It'll come to me probably after I'm done recording. But anyway, so this passage here says, so it starts out, it's actually on the second sort of story page. So what it would do is you would read it and it would say, what do you do? If you do this, go to this page, and if you go that, go to this page. Now there's much less agency in these books because you only had a couple of choices after each sort of story snippet or bit of information. It's not like you could do whatever you wanted. Obviously, you were limited still to what the writer put in the book, and a couple of choices at every sort of intersection. So this one starts out, an ominous creaking of wood makes everyone fall silent in the treehouse. As you swing around and throw the switch on your flashlight, the smiling face of your classmate and best friend Joey is illuminated. Easy with the flashlight, dude, Joey whispers. I'm gonna need these eyes for later. So, and then you read through this whole thing, it describes what's going on, and then at the end it says, to take Max soda along with you, risking teeth-rotting caffeine headaches and messy, sticky bike wrecks, turn to page 18. Also, it will probably make you wet your bed. To take Micah's delicious all-natural fruit shoot. What? Wow. And drink with no mess on your way to help Brad, turn to page 27. So you can see it describes these events that happen to you. Though you're the main character, you probably, each book would have given you a name. You're like, you're so and so, you're doing this. This is your job, or this is your skill, or maybe you're a knight or a wizard or whatever it is. But it's still events that are happening to you. So the book is written very much in the second person, and then it gives you choices. To me, this is one of the best ways, if you want to write narrative fiction in the second person, the choose your own adventure style, or multi-pathing narrative style, or giving your player a choice, is one of the best ways to do it without completely removing your reader's agency. If you want to write anything longer than a short story or flash fiction, because while you're still saying, here's what happens to you, you're giving your reader a choice at every crossroads to decide, where the story's going to go next. When you write long form and you just say, here's all the things that happen to you, you lose some of the things that make a reader care over the long form. When you've got 60, 70, 100,000 words, one of the most important jobs you have as a writer is to make your reader care about your main character, and a lot of times the secondary and some of the tertiary characters. You can't really do that with second person very well. Sure, they would care about themselves, but how long are they going to allow you to beat them up before they're done? Does that make sense? Especially if you're writing a story with a lot of conflict, or a story with a lot of danger or horror. How long are they going to put up with abuse before they stop caring? Because at the end of the day, they can still go, that's not me. And it's really difficult to use second person for character introspective and character description that creates empathy. Like in third person, you can talk about how a character feels about things. You can give a character personality. You can give a character a reason to exist and a reason for your reader to care, because you can do all those things you can't really do in second person. You could tell a reader what's happening to them. You can sometimes tell a reader what they should be thinking about what they're seeing on the page, but only to a certain extent, because then it's not really a story anymore. It's just a set of commands. So you're pretty limited in what you can do as far as making the reader care about the protagonist, which is them. First person, you can make them care because you're literally telling them the story, and you immediately have that natural human empathy for another person. While a first person writer still needs to build empathy, it's not as difficult, to me anyway, as it would be for third person. Because of that natural human empathy that most of us have. Most people who are not, certifiable sociopaths naturally care about the people sitting in front of them. It's just how we're built. So when you're telling a story from that perspective, it's a little easier to build that empathy. You just lose all that, to me, with second person. So to answer Gwen's request, and for the first episode, how do I write second person without it seeming weird? Quick recap: short fiction works really well when you're wanting to give the reader a view of your story, a view of your world, or a view of events in a quick flash through the eyes of the protagonist. It works good for that. It works well for a little bit longer fiction, flash fiction, and that stuff, and it has been used in novels. I'm not sure, again, never read any. There's not that many to read, so I'm not sure how that would work. It works really good in gaming. If you're a video game writer, works great there. If you're a tabletop gaming writer, it works great there. You're gonna be, that's pretty much the way you write games. If you want to do anything longer, I would highly recommend using a choose your own adventure type format. Now, you don't have to do the exact same thing as they did. You don't have to make it so complex, but give your reader some agency. It will help you and them build a reason to care. What happens next? When you give them a choice in what happens next, you give them a little more reason to invest their time and invest their interest and their empathy in this character that is them. So that's what I would recommend. If you're going to write the long form, do it with that format. I think it will work a lot better than really anything else that may have been tried in long form. So if you guys have any questions for me, drop them in the comments, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Facebook. All of the links and everything are in the video description below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let everybody know about this new show. I'm going to be sharing it around. It's going to come out in my newsletter. If you go to trevorbierschbach.com, you can find all the information about my writing. You can sign up for my monthly newsletter. I swear I don't sell your information to anybody. I just send a newsletter monthly that talks about my upcoming work, my shows. Every month I draw from new subscribers to the newsletter, and one person wins a free copy of my short story collection, When Heroes Rise. It's actually a physical book. You can see a picture of it on my website, signed and all that stuff for you, because I really appreciate when people take an interest, and I want to make sure, I would just want to get my stories out there. So check that out if you're interested. I will try to be doing more of these shows. If you have a topic idea, a thing you want to know about writing, a question that you may want me to go more in depth into, drop it in the comments, put it on Twitter, send me an email through my website, Facebook, whatever. I am looking for more topics. I'm going to try to come up with more class ideas, lesson plans, things that I've learned over the years, not just with writing, but I'm an indie writer and sort of an indie publisher. So, and no, I'm sorry, I can't publish your book. I started my own publishing company to make my life easier as an independent author. I would not be able to give you the time and attention you need to be a publisher for you. So if that's your question, I apologize. I can't. So don't even ask that. Maybe someday in the future, but right now I just cannot. You would need more time and attention than I could give you. So it would not benefit either one of us for me to do that. But anyway, like I was saying, oh wow, I lost track of what I was saying. Oh boy, what was I talking about? So we talked, if you have new questions, I'm going to come up with new lesson plans. talk about not just writing, but like marketing, the minutia of publishing independently, some of the different options that you have. There's a problem right now with Lulu, which is one of the options. I use Amazon KDP, but there's some drawbacks to that. Everything has its pros and cons, so that's a decision you're going to have to make. We will talk about those things in future episodes. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode of Lessons from the Dragon's Library, how to write in second person. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share it out there. Let people know about it. Let me know what you think. Watch our other content. I do a lot of gaming content, but there are other podcasts, other streams, other discussions. I used to do a weekly news show that you can find way back in the archives. But yeah, other than that, I think we're going to be done with this episode. Got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next time. You guys have a great